at classical medieval last time, and we looked at the general characteristics of the classical period. What was the classical period? What two cultures?
Roman and Greek.
Greeks and the Romans, ancient Greece and ancient Rome. And you remember that they stressed the intellect in everything they did because life was tough. Human beings are just here for the amusement of the gods. They enjoy watching us struggle with against our fate, knowing how everything is going to come out, and tragedy entertains them. So everybody's going to have a lot of tragedy in their life. So the classicists feel if you let your emotions control you, you're going to get destroyed. So instead you have to put your intellect in charge. You can't change the world. Your fate's already established, but you can change your attitude towards it. And the only way to change your attitude towards it is by using your intellect. So there's that heavy stress on controlling the emotions. The classical period doesn't like the emotions. It doesn't trust them. And so almost all of those characteristics that we looked at so far of the classical are all about, in one way or another, controlling your emotions and subduing them. Last thing we had looked at was the Homeric epithet, which was a traditional kind of phrasing that was used over and over in a long poem like the two that we looked at excerpts from, the Iliad and the Odyssey. And one of the reasons for that repetition was not only the repetition, people like repetition. Little kids will sometimes take a word and say it over and over and over again endlessly. Not just to drive their parents and their siblings crazy, but because it feels good to do it. So repetition is something that's biologically rewarding for us. So these repetitions had that effect, but they also were used really to tie the poem together. Remember, the poet's got to memorize thousands and thousands of lines of poetry, and his livelihood depends on how well he can do that. And there are times when he may lose track of the story that he's telling. Well, these little repetitions will help him tell him where he is in that story. One of the other techniques is the epic simile. Now, you know from the jaws of poetry, that a simile is a comparison using what? What words?
As, like, and them.
As, like, and then. An ordinary simile, if you turn it over, you can see Troy fell like a tree. You're comparing an event to an object here. In an epic simile, because the intellect is so important, the poet gets to show off by adding as many relevant details as he can to the second part of the comparison. And he should be picking those details because they deal with not only what he's comparing it to, but also to the event itself. For example, it's about the fall of Troy. The Iliad is about the war between the Greeks and the Trojans. And the Greeks had an empire and the Trojans had an empire, and the Trojan Empire was actually bigger. The Greeks spent, I think it's 9 years outside the walls of Troy, trying to get in. And when they finally do, Troy doesn't go down easy. When you sack a city, now think about how big a city is. I mean, it's not as big as, their cities weren't as big as our cities are, but Troy was still a pretty big place. It wasn't some place you could just walk across easily. And the soldiers got paid in what they could steal. It was a pillage. So how long do you think, let's say the city is 5 miles wide, and the army managed to kick in the front gate. How long does it take? Now don't forget, they got to stop at they're stopping at houses, breaking into them, trashing the furniture, destroying everything they can't carry, raping the women, killing everybody they can get their hands on, and stealing everything that isn't nailed down. How long do you figure it takes to get from one end of the city to the other till you've got all that done?
Takes a long time.
Takes a long time, hours if not days. And that's what the fall of Troy is like. It's like the fall of this tree. It's not just the tree, you notice though. Troy was overturning like an ancient rowan tree. Now he picks a rowan tree because it's the hardest kind of wood they had. And Troy was not easy. Troy went down hard. It took all those years to finally get in. And so the sack of Troy was probably took a long time too. So like this tree, it was hard to chop down. Not only is it a rowan tree, but it's an ancient rowan tree. The wood is almost petrified. It took the Greeks a lot of chopping to get in there. It's high. The tree is high up in the mountains. So is Troy, which hacked with stroke after stroke of iron axes by farmers vying all around to dislodge it. So you have all of these farmers chopping at this giant ancient tree. And the Trojans saw the Greeks as farmers and shepherds. And they didn't see them as a real civilization. They were sort of like the barbarians attacking Rome later on. Begins to tremble and continues while the crest shakes. So they're hacking away at this tree, and the whole tree starts to vibrate with the blows of the axes. And the top of it shakes back and forth. And it's the same thing with Troy. They break in through the gates, and then they start to spread out in the city, and they're fighting house to house, and the Trojans are retreating, and they retreat up to a hill in the middle of the city, to the citadel where they close themselves in, and then finally that goes. That's like the top of the tree. Till gradually vanquished, it gives a final groan, and at last overcome by the wounds and wrenched from its place, it trails havoc down the mountainside. So you have this big tree, it's chopped down. When it falls down, it slides down a mountain, splintering a lot of other little trees in its way. Same thing with the fall of Troy. Troy was an empire. When it went down, all of the client states went down with it. The chaos wasn't just in the city of Troy, it was all over. So again, the second part of the comparison is loaded up with details. And the author is showing off his intellect, because all of those details not only have to be true about how a big, giant, ancient tree would be cut down, they also all have to be true about Troy. The last characteristic there under classical, imitation of nature, realistic portrayal of life. This is Aristotle. Remember, we had Aristotle and Plato. Plato said it's an illusion, and Aristotle said it's real. Well, the Greek poets tried to describe life the way it was. To them, there was no sense dodging it. There was no cosmic battle between good and evil going on like there was for the Middle Ages. Everything was what it was, and what it was wasn't all that pleasant. Man's position in the world isn't anything really to look forward to. If you tell people the realistic truth about things, they can employ their intellect to try to deal with it. So when they try to describe the world, they try to describe it realistically. If you look at Albin Nidalius, you'll see almost all of these characteristics. First thing, it not only has a dominance of reason, but it preaches a dominance of reason. It's about Tibullus, whose nickname is Albi. Albin Nidalius means Albi, don't be sad. And why is Tibullus upset? His girlfriend just dumped him for another guy, for a younger guy. Tibullus, pull yourself together. You mustn't make such heavy weather when women throw you over. All day you melt in songs of woe, merely because a younger beau is now Neaera's lover. How should he? His girlfriend just dumped him. He's crying all the time. He's making up these sad songs about his broken heart, etc. How should he be reacting? She's probably awfully good looking, and he's not going to. He's obviously an older guy, because she took an even younger lover. So he has lost a lot. Should he be crying about it? No, he should be employing the intellect. The intellect ought to be telling him, look, you were lucky to get her in the first place because she's younger than you. What kind of an idiot would think that that was going to last? And last forever. You should have seen this coming. Is it the end of the world? Is that the last woman that's ever going to be interested in Tibullus? Probably not. So he's making too much of a fuss over it. So notice right away it tells him it's objective. It's not Tibullus telling you how bad he feels because his girlfriend left. Instead, it's somebody outside, so it's objective. It's trying to make sense out of it. It's not giving you the sensations of what it feels like to have your heart broken. Instead, it's giving him practical, useful advice, and the advice is restraint and moderation. Get hold of yourself. You're an older man. You shouldn't be acting like a fool like this. You should have control of yourself. You've been around for a while. Is this the first time Tibullus ever got dumped? Probably not. You live long enough, you get dumped more than once. So he ought to be used to it. And Horace is telling him, you're making too big of a thing out of this. Have a little dignity. This has happened to you before. This is going to happen to you again. This happens to everybody. Deal with it. Use your intellect. Restricted scope. Notice it doesn't try to tell him all of the things that he ought to do the next time so that he doesn't lose his girlfriend to somebody younger. It doesn't tell him all the ways that there are to deal with having gotten dumped by somebody, get somebody else, get revenge, all the different ways there are to deal with that. All he's doing is focusing on one thing, and that is get yourself under control. You're making everybody upset, acting like a fool like this. The poem has got a simplicity of form. You notice that it's got 6 lines in every stanza. It's got 4 stanzas, so we got even numbers. That's that idea of balance that we saw from the classical period already. The first 2 lines rhyme together in weather, and then you have alternate rhyme, over, woe, you have A, B, B, A. You have over, then woe and bow, and then lover. So you have 2 groups of rhyming patterns in that stanza. Do they change from stanza to stanza? What's it called when you rhyme 2 lines in a row? A couplet. Do they all start with couplets? Sure. Turns, burns, yoke, joke, wooed, good. And then they all have a line, another couplet, and then the second part of the couplet that was divided by the couplet we stuck in the middle of it. So it's got a simple form to it. It's not very complex. He's got a simple point to make: get yourself under control. It's balanced. Not only does the poem have an equal number of stanzas and an equal number of lines, but it preaches emotional balance. Tibullus is unbalanced here. It also follows that sequential organization. It's laid out like an argument. First thing he does is state the problem. The problem is Tibullus is making too much of a fuss over his girlfriend having left him. Then he's going to give some evidence before it leads to the conclusion he wants to draw, which is you have to accept things like that. The slender-browed Lycoris burns for Cyrus. Presto, Cyrus turns to court the peevish Julia. But Julia will no more abate her virgin pride than does will mate with wolves from wild Apulia. He says, look, this is the way it works. Everybody's in love with somebody who's in love with somebody else. You're in love with Neaera, and Neaera's got a new boyfriend. That's the way it always works. Lycoris loves Cyrus. Cyrus loves Julia. Is Julia going to go to bed with him? No. It's more likely that the deer will lay down with the wolves than it is that she'll go to bed with them. And you know, what's peevish mean?
Sure.
Sort of cranky, kind of nasty. This is the bitchy princess he's in love with. So even if she were in love with him, she'd still be making his life miserable. This is the way. No, well, why is it that everybody falls in love with the wrong person? What's the explanation for everything to the Greeks and the Romans? I think that's the way the gods want it. The gods think it's funny that way. Thus Venus, notice he gives us the evidence, then he starts to give us the explanation. Thus Venus plays her grimmest joke. Who's Venus?
One of the goddesses.
Yeah, one of the goddesses, the goddess of love and beauty. She loves to match beneath her yoke those who have least in common, and both in looks and characters concocts the most unlikely pairs. No help for man or woman. How many people do you know that are paired up with people that you think to yourself, what does she see in him? Or what in the world can he possibly see in her? It's almost inevitable that the people who turn the lights on when they come into a room and turn the TV off, married people who turn the lights off and the TV on. the odds on you marrying somebody with the same temperature sensitivity as you is almost zero. The room is always too hot or too cold for one of the partners. People always seem to end up with their opposites. And the Greek explanation is that that's what Venus thinks is funny. The more unlikely a pair she can concoct, the more problems they're going to have. And remember, human problems are a source of entertainment for the gods. And Venus likes to make people fall in love with the worst possible people for them. There's actually a scientific explanation for why we fall in love with people so different from ourselves. It's really a good mechanism for the survival of the species. We're attracted to people generally within a certain range, as unlike us as possible, because if we were attracted to people that were just like us, well, there's the problem right off the bat. Who's most like you? Your brothers and sisters. We were attracted to people just like us. There'd be a lot of inbreeding going on. Always a bad idea. If there's one genetic flaw, you multiply that every time you inbreed. So we're attracted to people most unlike us because if everybody was attracted to people like themselves, pretty soon, let's say people who lost water easily suddenly became attractive. They were the only people who got to mate and have offspring. Pretty soon, all human beings would lose water easily. First drought that comes along, first continued hot spell, everybody dies, species dies out. Or let's say the people who hate water start mating with other people who hate water. Pretty soon you got an awful lot, almost everybody hates water. Nobody learns how to swim, first flood comes along, species is wiped out. The more variety a species has, the wider a variety of calamities it's going to be able to survive. We're not really attracted to people rationally anyway. How many of you ever been in love? Nobody? One. Only one. The rest of you just been in heat? This is not bad. When you fell in love, did you sit down, make a list of things that you wanted in a person, and then go out and interview candidates until you found one like that? How did it happen?
That'd be pretty cool.
Just happened. It would be the sensible thing to do. It would be exactly what the classicists would tell you to do. Look, you can fall in love with almost anybody, so make a list of what the kind of person is you want. Go where those people are likely to be, and then you'll fall in love with one of them, and things will be a lot happier. But it never works that way. Nobody ever plans it out. Somebody just attracts you. Now, what the likelihood is that we're really attracted by is pheromones. Pheromones are chemical sex attractants. You can see it most obviously in insects. For example, there's a moth. And you know how small moths are and how big the forest is. So if you have a moth just flying around, ready to mate, what's the odds of them bumping into another moth? They're not real high. So instead, the female moth lands on a tree and puts out a pheromone, her personal perfume. And that floats down the wind. And the male moths have these huge antennae. And they're not for sound, they're for the only thing they're sensitive to is this one little chemical molecule in the pheromones of the female moth. And they fly around, and when a molecule hits that antenna, it feels good. And they go, ooh, that was nice. And then they fly back till it hits them again. And of course, pretty soon they're flying up the gradient to denser and denser concentrations of the molecules because it feels good to do that. And where do they end up eventually? Yeah, with the female moth. But that scent doesn't go out in a straight line. It goes out in a cloud. So every male moth in the forest who runs into one of those molecules starts flying up the gradient. So pretty soon there's 50 or 100 male moths there and one female moth, and she gets to look and go, he's nice, he's nice. The rest of you can leave. No, those 5 I want to stay. I'll make a decision on that. She gets to pick the best set of genes to pass on off to her offspring. It saves them flying around. So they're meant to attract people. When we get to the secular lyric in the Middle Ages, you'll see another example of it, the roebuck. The roebuck has scent glands at the base of his antlers. And in the spring, when it's mating season, he rubs those scent glands on the trees. And the scent gland is his aftershave lotion. It spreads out over the forest. And when female roebucks come along, they go, "Oh, that smells nice." And they end up where he is. The other advantage to it is that it warns off other male roebucks. Because the bigger he is, the bigger his scent glands. The bigger his scent glands, the more, by our standards, everything stinks. So when you fight over mates, you don't want the old, big roebucks fighting with the roebucks that have just come into their manhood, that are young and inexperienced. Why not? Who's going to win in that fight? Yeah, the bigger, older, experienced one every time. And so you're going to end up killing off a lot of young, good mating stock. So instead, when the young bucks go through the forest and they smell that roebuck aroma, they go, "Wow, this guy stinks worse than we do. There'll be a lot of women there, but there's not much chance we're going to get one. So let's go look in another part of the forest." And then we'll set up our pheromones. Pretty soon that guy will get old, he'll get a step slow, then we'll take him. But it isn't going to be this year. So that keeps nature from having those fatal collisions over mating. People have pheromones. Everybody's got a different aroma. That's why dogs can track people. Everybody's is unique. And you're attracted to the set of pheromones that are probably 180 degrees from your own. Again, why didn't nature have you turned on to pheromones exactly like yours?
Then you wouldn't have any variety.
You wouldn't have any variety. In fact, you wouldn't even be attracted to anybody. If the pheromones that turned you on were exactly like yours, your own scent would be a major turn on, so you'd be in love with yourself all the time. There'd be no point going out on dates. You would just stay home, you'd be perfectly happy, but the species wouldn't get propagated. And how about a scent like yours? Again, that's blood relatives. Nature doesn't want that because it increases the genetic flaws. So it makes you attracted to people with the opposite set of pheromones. So we have a scientific explanation why everybody ends up with everybody else. But for the Greeks, science doesn't exist yet. So for them, all the explanations are the gods, and it's the gods playing jokes. Venus plays this joke on everybody and hooks them up with somebody who's totally unlike them. So you notice he gives a series of examples here to support his point, that everybody ends up with somebody that doesn't want them. And then, now usually the poet stays outside of the poem because he doesn't want you paying attention to him rather than what he said. But in this case, Horace gives an example from his own life to say, look, even I know about this. I know that Venus plays these jokes, but I've got no defense against it either. Take my own case. I might have wooed, I might have dated a girl as fair, beautiful, as she was good. And here you see me slaving in utter bliss for Myrtilé, a slut more tetchy than the sea round southern headlands raving. She's mad all the time. No matter what I do, it doesn't please her. She's always unhappy with me. Is he thinking about dumping her? No, he's in love with her. And he says, and I know how stupid this is, and I also know there's nothing I can do about it. Venus made me fall in love with her. She made me fall in love with it because she thinks this is funny. Here I am, a poet, an intellectual, and I'm chasing after this woman who hates me and is miserable to me all the time. There's nothing more ridiculous than that. There's nothing you can do about Venus's joke except get yourself under control. So you notice it preaches chasteness. It's got a chasteness of style. It's about self-control, and it's controlled itself. When he gets to telling you about, when Horace gets to tell you about his girlfriend, he doesn't tell you how sad he is about that. He just points out what his life is like and how there's nothing you can do about it. So he doesn't get carried away. He's under control. He's decorous. He does the proper thing. He can't resist being in love with her, but he knows that it's Venus's joke, and he accepts that. Now, if you look at the medieval, things have changed when we get to the Middle Ages. Greece gives way to Rome. Rome gives way to the barbarians. Rome falls, and the center of Western civilization moves west and north, up into Germany and France and England. Paganism's gone. What takes its place?
Catholicism?
Christianity, because there's only one. There isn't Catholicism and Protestantism then. That doesn't happen until the 1500s. All there is Christianity. Christianity dominates the Western world. And it's all about faith. That's why literacy drops off almost to nothing. A lot of people were able to read in Greece and Rome. But by the time further you get into the Middle Ages, fewer and fewer people are able to read, and fewer people are able to think. They're discouraged from thinking. Why did the church discourage people from thinking? That was probably one reason, because it's easier to control people who can't think and can't plan and don't look ahead. You get them in a constant emotional state. What the Greeks said was right. If the emotions are in control, you have no control over yourself. So if somebody else can stir up your emotions, they can pretty much control you. Their excuse for it, though, was that thinking leads to questions. And questions damage faith. In the Middle Ages, this world is not really that significant. This world is a journey and a torment on the way to the next world. And whether the next world is a lot better than this, paradise, or a lot worse than this, hell, depends on what you do here. They live in a world where the supernatural, the cosmic world, this is Plato's world. The Greeks are Aristotle, even though Plato was a Greek. The Middle Ages live in a Platonic world. The world is an illusion. The cosmic world intervenes in this world. So in other words, whenever something happened, they looked for a cosmic explanation. They look for what we call a supernatural, an above the natural explanation. So that means that if you're walking along the road at night and you almost fall into a ditch but you stop just short, that's because your guardian angel grabbed you and held you back. If you did something awful, that was because the devil who's assigned to you got you to do that. If the milk goes sour, it's not because of any kind of chemical process or bacteria or anything like that. It's because the fairies turned it sour in the middle of the night. Or the devil went by in the middle of the night and so the milk curdled. There's always a supernatural explanation for everything that goes on. There's a cosmic battle going on between God and Satan. The world is the battlefield. Every individual soul is the battlefield. And so all the important things that are happening to you have to do with that battle between good and evil and about the condition of your soul. The physical world is just something you're going through on the way there. Now, faith, is faith believing that there is some kind of supreme, benevolent, supreme being directing the affairs of people? Is that intellectual or emotional? It's an emotional. You either have faith or you don't. You can feel faith. You really can't reason your way there. And one reason you can't reason your way to a faith in a benevolent, supreme being is that almost all the evidence is against it. I mean, look around. Death, war, crime, brutality, violence, old age, sickness, the death of children. The ichneumon fly. The ichneumon fly is a little wasp that lands in the back of a caterpillar, drills a hole in it, plants its eggs. And the eggs hatch, and over the next 2 weeks, without hitting any vital organs, they eat the caterpillar from the inside out. And only on the last day do they eat up the heart and the liver and the lungs, and then they eat their way out through the skin. What kind of benevolent God could create a thing like that? Stephen King would have been embarrassed to think about it. So most of the evidence says there either is no benevolent divinity, or if there is one, it's got to be a maniac. A monster runs the world. But emotions your emotions tell you that isn't true. Even though reason tells you death is probably the end of everything, and Aristotle was right, even the most convinced existentialist who believes that death is the end of everything still has that little nagging doubt, that little feeling that somehow, unreasonable as it is, we go on. We don't really die. And that's the emotional part. That's the leap of faith. So emotions are what's crucial. Because as far as the Middle Ages and Christianity are concerned, faith is the only thing that's important. Because faith will get you into the next world. This world isn't that important. It's the next world that matters, where your soul goes. So they emphasize the emotions. Plus, when you don't teach people to read and you discourage them from thinking, you end up with a lot of impulsive people. A lot of people who go on whatever jumps into their mind at the moment, who go with whatever emotion they happen to be in the grip of. Remember, you have no defense against your emotions except your intellect. And the intellect is largely withered during this period. Everything is intensely subjective. The poet writes about what's going on inside their skin. They write about their sensations. They write about their emotions. Emotions is what's important. They try to write stuff that's universal and sublime. Sublime means that it gives you a picture of the world beyond this world. And it's not necessarily realistic. The real world doesn't matter because it's an illusion anyway. Everything that seems to happen in the physical world is really a symbolic representation of what's really happening in the cosmic world. The struggles of your life are part of that struggles of good versus evil. Passion and piety. The Middle Ages are kind of schizophrenic time. Because on the one hand, you have very impulsive people because they're not trained to do much thinking. And the intellect isn't thought of very highly. The intellect is in fact seen as a danger because it'll make you think, and thinking will make you thinking will make you raise questions, and questions will make you lose your faith. Also, the population in the Middle Ages is relatively young. The average age is something like 14 to 16. So that means the vast majority of people are young, partly because people died off of so many things that we don't even think of as life-threatening, and also because infant mortality was so high. But there's an awful lot of young people. Well, are young people prudent and thoughtful and they plan everything out, or do they generally act on their impulses? And they're generally impulsive, a lot more impulsive than they're going to be 10 or 20 years later. So you have a relatively impulsive generation. And when you're young, along with being impulsive, what's the new magic that comes into your life somewhere around 14, 15, 16 years old? You hit puberty, all of a sudden the opposite sex becomes not those horrible creatures, but really interesting and attractive beings. So you got a lot of impulses, and you got the best body that you're probably ever going to have for the rest of your life, and it's enormously active, and your glands are running rampant. So what's the big temptation? Sex. The church always tried to control that. Christianity always tried to control that, and it always failed. But sex is against the rules. Sex outside of marriage. Before marriage, outside of marriage, it's wrong. It'll get you damned. You'll be tortured forever if you do that. So you're young, impulsive, and you know if you do this thing, you're probably going to die, and you're going to die forever. What's the odds on you doing it anyway? Pretty high. And of course, what happens is they follow their passions, and then as soon as the sweat dries and their breath returns to normal, and they stop and think, oh, I'm going to die because of that now. God's going to be mad at me. I'm going to be punished and tormented forever. So they go from passion to piety, to doing the proper thing, trying to make amends for it in some way, terrified that they're going to be destroyed forever. And they bounce back and forth between these ecstatic states and these terrified states. When you're the prisoner of your emotions, you're going to have, it's a painful life. There's a lot of interesting, pleasant things that will happen to you, but there are also some terrifying stuff. It's the stuff that the classical period said you got to get some control over, because otherwise your life will just bounce back and forth. You'll be at the mercy of whatever it is you feel. Intricacies are absence of form. Where the Greeks made those, remember we had class. Class meant that it was the beauty reduced to its essentials. Well, now we have style. And style is the more elaborate, the better, because style represents individuality. The more ornate a thing is, the more it appeals to your senses. So the Middle Ages has enormously ornate art. Instead of just soft colors, you get real vibrant colors out of all of a sudden. Those tapestries. Now, when you go to a museum and you look at these big wall hangings with all the pictures on them and things, they're enormously complex. And even after 1,000 years, they're still pretty bright. So you can imagine what they must have been like when they were first done. And actually, those tapestries with everything in it were actually a kind of card catalog for people. Everybody told stories, and everybody knew stories. And that was one of the ways that they entertained themselves. So if somebody said, well, let's have a story, and they said, it's your turn, you could look up the tapestry, and whatever your eyes lit on, a crow and a knight. So there was a crow and a knight story. There were probably several crow and knight stories. So you would that would trigger you into telling the crow and knight story. And if you saw the unicorn and the virgin, then you'd have a unicorn and a virgin story. So it's kind of a card catalog to all these stories that everybody knew. Also, they're so complex, there's always something to look at. The same thing is true when you look at the columns. When you looked at a Greek temple, plain, not very elaborate, balanced. What's a Greek column look like? There's actually 3 kinds, but I don't remember what they are. Oh, wait. Ionic, Doric, and Corinthian, I think it is. And it depends on what kind of little pieces at the top. And of the columns, there's really only 2 types. One is totally plain, and the other has these little grooves that run down it. Looks like somebody took their thumb in the wet cement. If you've seen one Greek column, you've pretty much seen them all. If you had to sit for 3 hours looking at a Greek column, you would want to shoot yourself after about 15 minutes, if that long. But the medieval columns are just the opposite. Every square inch on them is carved. And when you look at them after a while, you'll begin to see things you didn't notice. Yeah, there's a whole bunch of leaves twining around here, and then you see that there's a little gremlin in the leaves. There's a fairy carved over here. Or all of a sudden the leaves curling around will suddenly become a face that you didn't know was there, that they had put there all along. So there's all of these intricacies to their columns. You could actually sit for 3 hours looking at a medieval column, and you would still keep finding new things. Plus, they painted them. Somewhere in here, there's the cathedral of the Middle Ages. I mean, look at it. Does it look like a Greek temple? No. Greek temple. Long, oblong, short. Look at this thing. It's almost lace made out of stone. Every little inch on this is carved. There's all kind of figures on it. It's soaring upwards, reaching for the sky, reaching towards heaven. Everything is symbolic about it. Anybody know why this is a Christian cathedral, of course. Anybody know why there were 3 doors? Yes?
Yes, Father, Son.
Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, the Trinity. Everything has got this magical, symbolic significance to it. For example, beside all these ornate carvings, wherever the water ran off the roof, they had a gargoyle, a monster. And at one time, despite all the thousands and thousands of churches in Christendom, there were no 2 gargoyles that were the same. Now you might think, well, why would they carve monsters to put on a church? They were to scare away the evil spirits. The idea was that the demons would fly along and they would see these monsters that they would think were other demons, and they would say, whoa, they got turned into stone. We better stay away from that place. So it was to scare them off. But the really significant thing is that they were all different. Every one was unique. I mean, the Greeks put up a temple probably in a year or two. These things got built 500 years sometimes. Think how many generations that is. That's about 25 generations of people who devoted some part of their life to building this cathedral. And they built it because to them this was a symbol of good in the world. And it had those magical significances. And again, everything is carved and ornate, and there are little niches that you don't even know are there. You could wander around in a cathedral for a long, long time before you became familiar with every bit of it. You go inside a Greek temple, you're there half an hour, you've pretty much seen everything there is to see. But not in anything that has to do with the Middle Ages. Everything is ornate and complex. And it's complex because the world is complex because what you see of the world isn't the world anyway. It's a distorted reflection of that cosmic reality, that battle between good and evil. Spontaneity. They like art which just happens, which comes out of an overflow of emotion. Because to them, emotion is a good thing. Even though they didn't like being scared and they didn't like being sad, they did like being happy and they did like their ecstasies and they liked having a lot of fun. So emotion is of great importance, and of course they actually felt, and this is unlike most modern people who have a religion, not very many of them have a real intense emotional experience whenever they're involved in that religion. But in the Middle Ages, everybody did. Remember, you're surrounded by beings that you can't see. Some good, some evil. And they're all acting on you. And the only place you can go where those evil beings can be controlled at all is when you get inside that cathedral. Or when you get to some holy, sacred place. And the demons have to leave you alone and only your good angels stay next to you and guide you through the world. So for them, it's an exciting life, to say the least. Because you're in the middle of a horror movie all the time. And there are these invisible beings that are all around, and they explain everything that happens in the world. And so you have to constantly be doing magic to try to ward them off. Or religion and magic were pretty close in those days. I mean, anytime you thought there was a certain kind of demon, there was a special prayer you ought to say. You carried these special amulets that had been blessed by the church. And if you got sick, the first place you went, that was evil. You had to go and find something to get rid of that evil. It was probably a kind of interesting life, and it was certainly one that was exciting, and it was probably scary a good portion of the time, because you couldn't always depend on evil being overcome. Evil seemed to win sometimes, although ultimately evil was going to lose. So you follow your heart and things are spontaneous. Also, sensitivity, emotional sensitivity. The emotional tone of the work is what's significant. Everybody's emotions are significant. When we look at Beowulf, you'll see that not only does he describe what happens, but he tells you how the monster feels when his arm gets ripped off. So feelings are very important. Innovation, new stuff, making up new stuff. And again, you got people who don't do a lot of thinking, who love sensation, who are very emotional, who are very young, who are impulsive, and so they get bored easily. So they want new stuff all the time. They want stuff that's going to keep them occupied. And so art should innovate. It should make changes. It doesn't have to be done the same traditional way all the time. You don't need the Homeric epithets anymore. Associational organization. The Greeks laid it out sequentially. This is so, here's the evidence, here's the conclusion. For the Middle Ages, one thing would make them think of another thing, would make them think of another thing. They were connected by, associations occur when you connect objects on the basis of them having a common characteristic. So that fire and strawberries make perfect sense together. Why? They're both red. And so fire engines and strawberries go together as well. And Santa Claus and strawberries, because he's got a red suit. The connections go by whatever has common characteristics. So it's often they don't have that straight in a line kind of arrangement of ideas that you have with the classical period. And when you look at their works, they don't go in a straight line from beginning to end. They wander off in all directions. Flamboyance of style, the more elaborate the better. The more extreme the emotion, the better it is. The more intense the experience, the happier they are. Self-expression. In the classical period, human beings aren't worth much. All they are is a form of entertainment for the gods. But in the Middle Ages, every human being is crucially important. Every soul is being fought for by God and Satan. Every one of them counts. And so everybody is important. Everybody's one of a kind. The Middle Ages was big on one of a kind stuff. They didn't try to make things uniform. They tried to make everything different. Every person was different. And every person was important because God cared about them and was willing to fight evil and to defend them. The impact is more important than the sense. If a story terrified you, it was a good story. Whether it gave you any useful advice or not. Whether it dealt with things that actually existed or not. Of course, people believed in the things in the stories, which were imaginative. The author made a lot of them up. And even though people hadn't seen them, they still believed they existed. Nobody had seen a dragon, a fire-breathing dragon, and yet everybody believed that St. George had killed one. Nobody had ever seen a unicorn, but people believed they were out there. Why did they believe in unicorns and dragons? Well, look what else they believed in. Angels and devils. If you say there are no unicorns because I've never seen one, and you accept that argument, then you've got to accept the argument that there are no angels because you never saw one. And if there are no angels because you never saw one, there's no God because you never saw one. Well, they didn't want to go down that path. And so they said, well, invisible things can exist. And so if somebody says there are dragons out there, maybe you just can't see them because you're one of the good. Or maybe you can't see them because evil is able to disguise itself. And the dragon just blends into the background and so you can't pick it up. But it's there whether you can see it or not. They believe in all kind of things being there whether you can see them or not. Their poetry centers around metaphors of specific quality. In other words, comparisons that emphasize the sensation. Cold as ice, white as snow. Nature is a remnant of Eden. They don't deal with the real world as the real world. They deal with the world as a symbolic representation of that cosmic battle between good and evil. According to this theology, in the beginning, God creates the archangels. There's a war. One of them leads the battle. Anybody know who it is? Lucifer, Satan. Michael's on the good side. Michael's the chief warrior angel. But Satan is an angel when he starts out. He's in fact the most beautiful of the angels, the light of the morning, Lucifer. And after his followers and he lose and they get cast out of heaven, they set up, God creates the earth, and then they battle over that. And he gets Adam and Eve, the first human beings, to betray God by eating from the tree of knowledge, and they get thrown out of Eden. But Eden is still here. Eden is still around us. We just can't see it. And so the Middle Ages always sees everything as the invisible, because how big they are and everything that you can't see. Well, Eden is here and you can't see it either. But you have to have a belief in it. So when they deal with things, it's symbolic. So that, for example, when we look at Beowulf, Beowulf is not just a tough guy who likes to kill monsters. He's God's soldier. He's the representative of good. And Beowulf isn't just vermin. He's not just a giant rat. He is evil itself. He's symbolic of evil. You can see this bouncing back and forth between sensation and passion and the religious side of them. Because religion kept telling you you're going to die, and what you've done in this life you're going to have to pay for one way or another. If you've done good things, you get rewarded. If you've done bad things, you're going to get punished. And the punishment is eternal and it's painful. The secular lyric, the non-religious, the ordinary daily life lyric. Lyrics are short, intense poems, generally focused on sensation. And this is one about the big spring festival. People are going a Maying. The May festival was probably the most important left over from the pagan world. I mean, Christianity is running things, but there's still a lot of stuff left over from paganism. And one of them is the May festival. And the May festival comes about because, how do you get married in the Middle Ages? Same as now, try a few people on, keep the one you like.
Parents arrange.
Your parents arrange it. Actually, your father arranges it. Your mother has no official input. Women have no input whatsoever, officially. And even unofficially, they tend to get ignored. Your father's going to arrange it. So he's going to pick out your husband for you. On the basis of what? Good looks, charm, how good a dancer he is? Money and power. Military alliances, political alliances, and money. How little money he'll have to give up to get you taken off his hands, and how much money he can get back if you marry into this wealthy family. What kind of military alliance he can get out of it. If he can marry you off to this guy over here, now he doesn't have to protect his flank anymore, and he can use his forces on this side. If your father is picking your husband on the basis of money and power, what's he probably going to look like? This is what he's going to look like. You generally don't get money and power when you're young. It takes a while to accumulate it. So you're probably going to be 16 and walking down the aisle, and walking up the other aisle is going to be somebody who looks like me. You're going to say to your father, please tell me that's his grandfather. And your father's going to say, shut up. You got one thing to say today, I do, and that's it. So they marry you off to this old guy, and you lose all interest in the opposite sex, right? No, of course you don't. Biology doesn't change. Everybody else is married to somebody that they aren't in love with. They didn't pick out who it was they're going to marry. There's not a lot of passion holding people together there. And so they're going to be attracted to other people. So you're attracted to somebody else at the court. Where do lovers go in the Middle Ages?
The woods.
The woods. There's no motels. So you fall in love with somebody, or at least you fall in heat with somebody in November. What's the big problem? Cold? Are you like what? Like all say you're all really 70 years old, aren't you? These are just young people masks you're wearing? Too cold? And some of you said you've been in love. Too cold. Penguins frozen face down in the ice. Maybe that's too cold. But short of that, if you're in love, cold doesn't really enter into it. Why are you going to the woods in the first place?
Get warm.
That's true. But you could have done that in the castle and gotten warm.
Don't want to get caught.
You don't want to get caught. You want privacy. So the real problem from November on, there's no leaves on the trees. And there's guys who stand up on top of the castle and their whole job all day long is to watch around to see nobody sneaking up. You go off in November, they're going to know. Isn't that the Queen with Sir Rodney? What she sees in him, I'm much better looking than him. I think I'll hit on her. What do you think? I think she'd like me, don't you? You can't go sneaking off. So what do you got to wait for? You got to wait for those leaves to come out. Imagine how tough that is. You're young, you're impulsive, you're in heat. You got to wait. Oh, it's January. They're still not out. Finally, in April or May, the leaves are out fully, and we have this big festival. and they put up a maypole, and everybody takes one of the ribbons off the maypole, and they dance around it, twining the ribbons until they're rubbing up against one another at the bottom of the pole, and then they pair off and go a-maying. They go gathering mayflowers. Do they pair off with their spouse? No. What would the point in that be? One of the reasons why you have festival, why civilizations have it, is there are two basic human drives that you have to put some controls on. And they are sex and drugs. You find them in all cultures and all times. In fact, you even find drug use outside of the human species. Even animals take drugs. Do we do this? No. Blue jays, for example, will land on an anthill and pick up ants and squeeze the formic acid out of them all over their things, and then breathe the vapors in and get wrecked on formic acid. Have you ever given your cat catnip? That's pussycat dope. I mean, they don't get real rational after you give them catnip. They're like some of your friends, more than likely. The jaguars in South America eat yage, a psychoactive plant. Birds eat morning glory seeds, which has an LSD-like substance in it. Monkeys and elephants prefer alcohol. When the fruit drops off the trees, it ferments, and when it does, it turns to alcohol. And the monkeys show up and get drunk on eating the fermented fruit, and they make a lot of noise, and then the elephants come and they start shoveling it in like crazy, and then they get drunk and they run around bumping into trees and trashing huts and stuff. 10 years ago, a herd of elephants broke into a brewery in Nairobi, knocked down the wall, killed 2 people, drank all the beer in the vats, and ran around stepping on everybody. There's a lot of drug use in the animal world, but there's very little drug abuse. Why? Almost everything is involved in a predator-prey relationship. If you're a stone blue jay, you're lunch for the cat. There's only a couple times you can be staggering around on the ground to wreck the fly without getting eaten. So if you become a drug abuser, you're pretty much gone. And animals seem to tend to take drugs for the same reason people do. One, they like to get out of their normal state of consciousness. When they did experiments with alcohol and the elephants, psychologists are always doing loony stuff. Said, well, let's give alcohol. There's a thought. Let's give alcohol to the elephants and see what happens. And what happens was that most elephants were social drinkers. They would drink a little bit of the alcohol, and they would feel a little bit good, and then they would wander away. Very few of the elephants drank to drunkenness, so that they couldn't stand or they got somewhat crazy. Until, they left the alcohol there, and the same thing happened with people. Some of the elephants did become alcoholics. Some of them drank a lot more than the others. Then the psychologist said, well, the experiment's done. They took the big vats of alcohol away. And most of the elephants didn't seem to mind, except a couple alcoholic elephants who were really upset about it. And then construction started next door. Now elephants are used to being the biggest, noisiest thing around. All of a sudden there's something bigger and noisier than them. And that got them scared. And every day, the elephants would go to where the alcohol had been put out and pace back and forth waiting for the bar to open. So somebody told the psychologist. The psychologist brought the vats of alcohol back. All of the elephants drank to excess. All of them drank so much that they fell over, and because they were scared. And that soothed them. Self-medication. An awful lot of drug use is really people in pain of one kind or another self-medicating themselves and taking too much medication and screwing up their lives even more than they were before. In the end, the elephants weren't much different. When the construction stopped, almost all of the elephants, their interest in alcohol dropped way down. And they went back to their normal lives. Of course, there were more addicted elephants by that time, so they suffered when they closed the bar the second time. So you have the basic responses even in mammals. Now,
Why can't you just let everybody do as much drugs as they want and have as much sex as they want? Because if you do, you won't have a culture. You'll have a big party, but it won't last very long. I mean, if everybody could party as much as they want, who's going to bother planting the crops? Who's going to defend the walls? Who's going to build the walls in the first place? You won't have a culture. Well, why not just get rid of those two things entirely? This is our culture, no sex, no drugs, that's it. Would you want to move there? No, nor would anybody else. Those are basic human drives. So you have to find some way to satisfy them without letting everybody run amok all the time. And one way to do that is with festival. The Greek period had a lot of festivals. And of course, their most important ones were Bacchus, the god of wine. How do you celebrate the god of wine? You get drunk. And Pan, the god of sex and dancing, how do you celebrate him? Sex and dancing. That was their festival. You could have, any population can put up with about 15% of its people partying all the time. Once it goes above 15%, the amount of work getting done goes down pretty steadily, and the civilization begins to fall apart. But everybody needs some of that time. So if you have a festival for 2 weeks, because 2 weeks is usually enough partying even for young people. You know, spring break doesn't go on forever. After 2 weeks, people are pretty much, they want to stop. And this is true. The older you get, you won't even make it for 2 weeks. Get into your middle 20s and you'll be saying, I just can't party like I used to. And then by your 30s, it'll be like, didn't we used to stay up all night? That'll be gone, and it just goes downhill after that. But if you let people get it all out for 2 weeks, every so many months, then that lets the pressure off, and people can go back to following the restrictions most of the rest of the time. And that's what going and Maying does. You pair off, you go off with the person you've been attracted to all along, you come back 6 hours later, big smile on your face, couple daisies, nobody asks any questions. Of course, you've got to come, if you disappear for 3 days, then you've gone over the line, then you're in trouble. Oh, we got lost. Give us a break. The castle's on a hill, you can see it for 20 miles in any direction. You didn't get lost, you were out of bounds on this one. But as long as you just went, you went to Maine, you came back, festival's over, everybody's relieved for a while, and that tension builds up till the next festival. And that's what the secular lyric is about, and we'll go into that. Come back at 2:35, and we'll start looking at the secular lyric.
2:45?
3:05.
3:05, okay.
Come back at 2:40. No wonder everybody stayed.
Sometimes we make more money with the tips than we would with what you get paid.
So the secular lyric is about this big festival, the spring festival everybody's been looking forward to all along. And it's a celebration of summer. That's why I translated that as Summertime, 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 which is a rock and roll classic, which was about the same thing. Summer is coming in, loud sings the cuckoo. Anybody know why it's the cuckoo? I mean, of all the songbirds there are in England, nightingales supposedly got the most beautiful song. Why the cuckoo? Anybody know what the term was for somebody whose wife was sleeping with somebody else in the Middle Ages? They were cuckolded. They'd been cuckooed, and the reason they'd been cuckooed is the cuckoo lays its lays its eggs in other birds' nests. So, if you're being cuckooed, somebody's laying eggs in your nest. So the cuckoo's singing because where is everybody now? Off, and when they've gone to Maine, they're off with somebody else's wife. So the cuckoo is singing a lot. Groweth seed and bloweth mead. The seed grows, the meadow blooms, and springeth the wood new. Finally the leaves have come out. Sing cuckoo. Everybody's been waiting for that cuckoo to get to sing since November. You bleats after lamb, lows after calf cow. The cow bellows after its calf. Bullock snorts, roebuck farts, merry sing cuckoo. Well, sings the cuckoo. Cease never now. Sing cuckoo and sing cuckoo, sing cuckoo, sing cuckoo and So the cuckoo is singing. I mean, you've been waiting since November. You haven't been waiting just to hear the cuckoo sing once. So they wanted to sing over and over again. This cuckoo is singing well. A lot of anticipation leading up to that. Cease never now. Sing cuckoo and They want the cuckoo to sing again and again and again and again. You notice also that there are the graphic details of life. It's the mating season because it's spring. Remember I told you about the roebuck? They had the scent glands at the bottom of its antlers. Well, the peasants look around and they think, boy, this stinks. Let's see. Why does it stink in the hovel? Oh, it must be the same thing with the roebuck. When you have that, when does the bullock snort? When does the bull snort? Usually when he's preparing to mate. So this is all about details of mating here. Would you have those details in a classical poem? No. Those details are supposed to arouse and excite people. Is that what you want to do in a classical poem? No, just the opposite. You don't want to arouse them or excite them. You want to get their emotions under control. So where the Middle Ages celebrates the passion and the big party they're having, this is basically the spring break poem, although spring break isn't what it used to be. How many of you are working through spring break? Oh, I just thought there would be even more. I thought all you did was work all the time now, students. That's what they keep telling me. I have 6 jobs. I'm trying to fit this in. There was a time when almost every college student went off somewhere on spring break and just stayed drunk and disorderly for 2 weeks. But people have to work now. So this is what they're celebrating, and it's about the sensations of it. It doesn't give you any good advice about what to do on spring break. It's just telling you what a great time the poet has whenever spring comes in. At the same time, you remember, while they're having all this good time, they're throwing away their salvation. All those things that they're doing here while they're partying are all going to get them damned. So as soon as the party's over, they start worrying about that. Now, when you don't have an intellect to step in and say, wait a minute, if you do this, you're going to regret it. A lot of people are going to get hurt. You need something else. And what they did was, one way that they avoided temptation was they carried around what were called memento mori. Like memos, thank you. Memos from death, basically. They carried around little human bones, little knuckle bones, finger bones in their pocket. And that way, when they got really tempted, they could reach in their pocket and feel those bones and think about being dead. Because once you're dead, then you're going to have to pay for all of this. And that might keep you from giving way to your passions. But you notice again, they didn't use the intellect, they used a counter sensation. So that if you're really excited and aroused about somebody, you could touch this thing and think about being dead, and that's pretty much a mood killer right there. Which was, of course, the idea. Thinking about dead isn't a mood killer?
Well, no, I mean, isn't it like they are using their intellect because they're thinking about it, you know what I mean?
Well, they have to think to put their hand in their pocket. You're right there. But they're not like a classicist would be, where a classicist would say to himself, well, yes, this would be a whole lot of fun for an hour or two, but there are a lot of consequences to this. And do I really want to pay the consequences? And is this really the right thing to do? In the Middle Ages, they're about to leap, and then if they're lucky, they think enough to just reach in and feel those bones and go, oh, God will get me for this. I better not do it. So you're right, there is some thinking, but it's not the kind of intellectualizing that we would see from the classical period. In fact, the religious lyric, this shows you the other half of the Middle Ages. When the turf is thy tower. What's the turf? The ground. When will the ground be your tower, your castle? When you're dead. And the pit is thy bower. The pit is the grave. A bower is a bedchamber or an area usually strewn with rushes or flowers for lovers to go lay down in. So when the pit is your bed, Thy skin and thy white throat, sullen worms will still know. What helpeth then all the world win? You know, what good is it going to do you to have had a really great time while you were alive if you're going to end up in eternal torment for it? What good will it have done you to have won the world, to have gotten rich, to have become powerful, to have had everybody that you wanted, to have stuffed yourself at every opportunity? What good will all of that do you once you're dead and the pit is your tower? And you notice the graphic details. This is not chaste. This is flamboyant. It doesn't just say when you're dead. What's going to happen to your beautiful long white neck when you're dead? Sullen worms will still note. Worms are going to eat you when you're dead. Your beauty isn't going to matter much at all. Why does he pick her throat? The throat is a symbol for beauty. Oddly, the Middle Ages, that was a big turn on, a long neck. Don't ask me why. The ideal of feminine beauty has changed enormously over time. When the Renaissance come in, everybody has the little faces and the little teeny childlike bodies. Then you have Rubens, and all the women weigh about 230, 240. But they're proportioned, but they're still big ladies. And that's feminine beauty. And then in this part of the Middle Ages, it was having a long neck. Why did they emphasize your white throat? Not having a suntan. Remember, this is the Middle Ages, so you have the aristocracy and you have the peasants. Who gets the suntans? The peasants, because they have to be outside working. So if you had a tan, if you weren't palely white, if you were really rich, you never had to go outside. If you went outside, you had somebody carry a little umbrella over you all the time. So if your skin was, if you were rich, you wanted to have as pale a skin as possible. So she's got all the things that would have made her beautiful and had as much fun as she could, but there's that warning at the end. What good will it have done you to have gotten all that you wanted when you're going to die? And when you die, your body will be nothing. Remember, this world is an illusion. The physical world passes away. There's only the eternal world that you have to worry about. And that's what everybody is supposed to be focused on. When we look at the, I'll do my characteristics here. In the prose works, you see the same kind of thing. If you looked at the classical epic and the medieval romance, they're both poems, they're both real long, thousands of lines. For the classical epic, the examples are Homer's Odyssey and the Iliad and Virgil's the Aeneid. And we have excerpts out of the Odyssey and the Iliad. Some of their characteristics, they have all the characteristics that you'd expect out of the classical period, but they have some others as well. For example, elevated style. You only want to use the highest language. And in fact, the work usually starts out with the poet's appeal to the muses, to the goddesses, to come down and inspire them, to get inside them, to possess them, to help them write the work within the limits of their abilities. And if you look at the excerpt from the Iliad, the first thing it says is, "Sing, goddess, the anger of Peleus' son Achilles and its devastation." Sing, goddess. The muses are goddesses. He wants the goddess to do the singing. So that's elevated. Right away, the work opens up with talking to the gods. That's a lot different than it is for the Middle Ages. The Middle Ages, instead, you have a lot of use of the grotesque. That's where that flamboyance comes in, going to extremes, stirring up the emotions. Remember that relationship? The sensations go up, emotions go up. So the more sensation you put in it, the more you're going to stir up the emotions. If you look at Beowulf, you'll find some of that some of that use of the grotesque. First of all, the rhythms are all about the emotion. The rhythms gallop along. It's exciting. A murderous ravager minded to snare, spoil of heroes in high-built hall. Storming the building, he burst the portal, though fastened of iron, with fiendish strength, forced open the entrance in savage fury, and rushed in rage o'er the shining floor. Look at all of the alliteration in there. Spoil, storming, strength, savage, rushed, rage, fastened, floor, fiendish. You've got a whole pattern of interlocking alliterations. And the repetitions stir up the emotions. Also, the rhythm of the poem makes it move along very fast. The grotesque comes in. Now, there's a mead hall. First thing that the Vikings did, the Celts did when they got any money, was build their own bar. That's what a mead hall is. There's a difference between classical and medieval. The center of social life for the classical period is the forum, an open-air area where orators went and talked to crowds of people. For the Vikings, it's the mead hall. Mead was a drink made out of fermented honey. It was enormously powerful stuff. And the mead hall was where the warriors went and drank mead. It's where they got drunk. Hrothgar's mead hall has been haunted for quite a while now by a monster named Grendel. And Grendel comes in and kills the knights all the time, and nobody can touch him. Why can't anybody kill Grendel? He put a curse on every blade. You notice magic appears in this, the supernatural. It's not like you would get in the classical telling. The classical would be because he was too strong or he was too quick. There'd be some reasonable explanation for this. But this, for the medieval, the explanation is supernatural. The sharpest sword, the choicest iron in all the world could work no harm to the hideous foe. On every sword he had laid a spell, on every blade. He can't be killed with a weapon. Beowulf is comes there to get rid of Grendel. Not because it's Hrothgar's his cousin. But I mean, Hrothgar's had this problem for years. Grendel doesn't decide to go help him until he runs out of monsters to kill in the south. That's what Beowulf. That's what Beowulf does. He kills monsters. That's his hobby. It's also his life work. And when he runs out of monsters one place, he goes somewhere else. So you notice that he's not motivated by any high purpose. He's motivated basically by the desire for action and adventure. But he represents the good. And Grendel, this is part of that nature is a remnant of Eden, the symbolic portrayal of light. Grendel is the devil. He's accursed of God. He's the shepherd of sins. To the Middle Ages, Christ was the shepherd of virtues. He would flee to the darkness, the fellowship of devils. But the devil lives with devils. The foe of God, the enemy of God, the hell-thane, the prince of hell. He's going to run away to the home of the fiends with grim delight as he warred with God. Who warred with God in this theology? Satan, Lucifer. The Grendel is a representation of Satan. And that makes Beowulf a representation of God and the good. And at the end, you notice it doesn't say that they got rid of some vermin, that they got rid of a monster. Instead, he purged of evil the hall of Hrothgar. This isn't a battle between a knight and a monster. This is a battle between good and evil. And the grotesque comes in where you get that description of the fight. The demon delayed not, but quickly clutched a sleeping thane in his swift assault, tore him in pieces, bit through the bones, gulped the blood and gobbled the flesh, greedily gored than the lifeless corpse, the hands and the feet. When you get the monster chewing up somebody's feet, you've gone over into the grotesque. Every little detail. Even when Beowulf comes in, Grendel comes in and Beowulf grabs him. He sprang to his feet, clutched Grendel fast, though fingers were cracking, the fiend pulling free. There Grendel suffered a grievous hurt, a wound in the shoulder, gaping and wide. Sinews snapped and bone joints broke. Notice you get all the graphic details. You get the graphic details because the details stir up the senses. And that's what the Middle Ages is all about, stirring up the senses, stirring up the emotions, giving you a symbolic expression of the conflict between good and evil. When you look at the classical, it reflects a heroic age. Now we think of Beowulf as a hero, but there's a difference between the classical hero and the medieval hero. The medieval hero is supposed to be the good guy. And when we get to the more to Arthur and the Arthurian legends, that's exactly what Lancelot is. He's the perfect knight. He's virtuous as well as strong. Things changed during the Middle Ages. Early Middle Ages, all you have to do is be strong and brave. Beowulf is strong and brave, but he's not particularly good. He's not going up there because he feels a duty to his kinsmen. He's not going up there because he wants to make life better for everybody. He's going there because there's a monster there to fight. And in fact, if you read between the lines, there's something suspicious going on here, because the plan is Beowulf is supposed to sleep in the big hall with all the other knights. And when Grendel comes, well, what's his plan for Grendel? Because no sword can kill him. It's like the World Wrestling Federation kind of plan. I'll lay here, when the monster comes to bite me, I'll grab him and tear his head off. This is a plan? I'll use myself as live bait, and then I'll just tear him apart. So he's supposed to be in there waiting with himself as live bait. But you notice the first time Grendel comes, he kills a knight, and everybody's running around. There's this big turmoil, and they're lighting up all the torches. The king comes running in. A little bit later, Beowulf comes running in, and one step behind him is the queen. Why? Where was Beowulf supposed to be sleeping? In the hall with the knights. Why wasn't he there? He was with the queen. That's why she gets there a step behind him and a lot of steps behind the king. This is not a particularly good guy. Yeah, get rid of your monster, but you ought to expect I'm going to enjoy myself while I'm here. He's not particularly virtuous. Later on, by the time we get to the end of the Middle Ages, as you'll see, chivalry comes in, and there's a difference between a chivalric hero and a chivalric age and a heroic age. The classical hero is not necessarily good. He's somebody the gods have picked out for special adventures. But these people that get picked out have enormous flaws. Hercules, the strongest of the mortals, has these 7 labors that he has to perform. And he does rid the world of a whole couple different monsters and a couple different villains. But in a drunken rage, he murders his wife and his child. This is not the good guy. Ulysses, who you read about in the Odyssey, also called Odysseus. He's known for his lying. He's called the wily Ulysses, the tricky Ulysses. He lies just for practice. He lies when he's not even in any danger. Once when he's shipwrecked, he washes up on shore, and there are these women bathing there, and they're taking care of him. They're no threat to him whatsoever. And when they ask him who he is, he tells them a lie. And he keeps lying until he thinks, well, maybe it's okay, these people are friends after all, and then he starts to tell them the truth. But he's always got some trick up his sleeve. By the Middle Ages, being a liar was one of the worst things you could be. For the Vikings, if you murdered somebody, you could pay blood guilt. You could give his family some money, and that would square things. But if you broke an oath, if you told a lie after you had sworn to it, you were an outcast. Everybody hated you. Ulysses would not be a hero in the Middle Ages. But for the classical period, he is, because a hero, again, is just somebody special. They're not necessarily good. They are different than other people. And look at Ulysses. On his way home to his faithful wife, Penelope, who hasn't been sleeping with anybody, he gets seduced at least 3 different times. Of course, he has a great excuse. He was bewitched. Oh, she cast a spell on me. It wasn't really my fault. Got to be husbands all over the world thinking, he got away with that? Well, as you'll see when we look at the telling of the Odyssey, he does it really. I mean, when the Middle Ages tells the story, Penelope is completely faithful, and she believes he's completely faithful to her. Only the interference of the gods could keep that apart. But when the classical period tells it, she knows what's going on. You send a guy away for 7 years. You think he's going to stay celibate? Not very likely. And she knows that, but she says that's the way the world is. She doesn't even ask him about that, because she doesn't want to know. But she suspects. But it's a portrayal of the real world. The real world is tough. The classical period would say, well, that's what men are like. You've got to expect them to behave like that. And Penelope did. So Penelope doesn't ask him a lot of questions about how he spent his time while he was away. So the classical hero is generally bright, but he's not necessarily good. Chivalry is a whole different thing. Chivalry comes in, if you turn the page, that sheet over, you'll see what chivalry is all about on the back. It's the social, moral, and religious code of the perfect knight. And it comes in gradually. It's really King Arthur that brings it in. In Beowulf's day, all you had to be was strong and brave. But you'll notice that strong and brave under chivalry moves way down to number 4. Because by the time chivalry comes in, all knights are God's knights. By the code of chivalry, you don't always have to win. When you meet a knight who's better than you and he's clearly beaten you, you can surrender and there's no shame in that. But you cannot take a backward step from evil. Because when you fight for evil, you're fighting for God. And that battle between God and Satan is to the death. It's to the death for everybody. So you can't back away from that fight. The church dominates everything. But the second big employer is feudalism. God gives land to the king. The king gives big pieces of land to big knights in return for military service, for loyalty. The big knights give smaller pieces of land to smaller knights in return for loyalty and military service. The smaller knights give still smaller pieces of land to the lesser knights in return for loyalty and military service. And you have this big hierarchy. Down at the very bottom, there are knights who are really just working for room and board and a suit of armor. Everybody wants to move up and get themselves a castle someday and have some land. All the knights want to get to that. But to get to that, you've got to do something extremely brave and get yourself promoted. Now, there are openings occurring all the time because there's constant warfare. So there's always somebody who owned a castle getting themselves killed, and somebody above them is looking around for somebody really tough to give that piece of land to. So you get a good shot at moving up. Ultimately, though, it's all based on the religion. The religion is about betrayals, so chivalry is about faithfulness. Religion is about Satan betrays God, one of his own angels. Adam and Eve betray God. Judas betrays Christ. There are all kinds of important betrayals in this. So it emphasizes faithfulness, loyalty. And the first thing that the knight has to be faithful to is God and the king. In that order. Second, you have all these knights. And they're kind of like a jock fraternity. They're all great athletes. They're all well trained. All of their training has been about fighting and killing things. So what is it they want to do all the time? Yeah, fight and kill things. That's what they're good at. The problem is they tend to run amok. What's the status of women at the beginning of the Middle Ages? They're just property. They're prizes that the knights fight for. They don't have any value in themselves. And basically they belong to the strongest guy around. If you're a knight and you can take a woman away from somebody else, then she's yours. It's the spoils of war. When you sack a city, you get to take whoever you can get your hands on, and you take them with you. And you trade them like playing cards with the other knights. Or you sell them off. All women are as property. When chivalry comes in, women get moved up from that and put on a pedestal. They become the weak and they have to be protected. And that's both good and bad. It's good in the sense that now a knight's idea of foreplay was a couple good punches in the head so that you got a lot more agreeable if you were a woman. That's out the window. You can't beat up women now. You have to protect women. So that was really good for women. The problem with putting them on the pedestal was when they're treated as weak and helpless, they're treated as children. So you tend to see their intellect in the same way. Actually, women that being put on a pedestal, women are just beginning to finally get out from under, having been put in the same class with weak and helpless children. And it's only of late that their intellects have been recognized and begun to take an equal place in the world with men. Middle Ages, they're either property and you do whatever you want with them, or they become the things that you have to defend. Now you don't want a whole lot of knights riding around sleeping with any woman they want just because they're tougher than whoever's there to protect them. You want to have your knights instead dedicate themselves to one woman. That keeps down the rape and pillage when they go off. It's not so much you care about what they do in foreign countries, but they're in your country most of the time. And you don't want them going around killing the peasants and taking their wives and using them and throwing them away. That upsets everybody. Plus, you can't go around killing off too many peasants because you really need to, even though they're worthless scum, they're property, they come with the land, they don't have any rights, they're barely considered human. Nevertheless, you kill too many of them off, they don't bring in a crop. They don't bring in a crop, everybody starves. So in order to get the knights under control, chivalry has this idea of the true love. One woman in the world for you. And they encourage the knight to find his true love pretty early. Now, do you want him to get married to his true love right away? How good a warrior is a married man? Generally not very good. He's got something to lose. What you want to do is make it so that he has to be really good in battle to get his true love. So chivalry sets up that in order to be worthy of your true love, you have to do heroic deeds and dedicate them to her. Now, you're young, you're in love, you found the perfect woman for you, but you can't get next to her until you get to be a hero. So what that means is that when the battle starts, the married men are going after you. You climb up the ladder into the boiling pitch and the rocks that they're throwing down. Everybody's trying to get to the back. You know, I like to fight. I'm a good knight, but I got a wife and kids here. I don't know if I can really risk this frontal attack going up those ladders and stuff. But if the only way you can get next to your true love is to get up those ladders and start killing some of the king's enemies, you're going to be pushing people out of your way to get to the top. So it encourages, and you do, all right, you do this heroic deed one time. Is that enough? No. In fact, a woman who was only worth one heroic deed wouldn't be much of a woman. She'd be kind of ashamed of herself. I mean, that's all you got to bring to this relationship? You killed what? One Saracen? That was it? You climbed up one ladder? Gee, you must not think much of me. So if you really think a lot of your true love, you're going to be doing these heroic things over and over and over and over again. Ideally, many of the knights, the kings would really have liked the knights to take the same 3 oaths that the monks took. Chastity, obedience, and poverty. Okay, you can see why you would want a knight to take a vow of obedience. That he'll obey. You give him an order, go charge that band of archers, and he'll go. Why do you want him to